All right, so these are some of the best things I learned at Funnel Hacking Live 2025. So hopefully you can apply them to your business, even if you missed it. So I'm gonna try to go through all of this in just somewhat sequential order, but it's kind of random of just different things that stuck out to me. But there's a few key things in here that I think will really help my marketing in 2025, and I hope it'll help yours. So this is my third Funnel Hacking Live that I've been to, and one of the cool things that I get to experience every single time is watching Russell Brunson pitch. It's kind of like a 4-day long webinar where you can just like, if you know what he's doing, you can watch him set things up. You can watch him kind of pre-frame and, build value in people's minds, and all of the things that he would do on a webinar, he's doing, throughout the week. He's building his yes ladder. He's getting people to raise their hands. He's saying, right, you getting this? Does this sound good? Right? He's just building all the things all week. And on day one, there's 2 just interesting pre-frames that I thought were good. Again, it was just setting up the pitch that was going to come on Friday, which if you haven't been there, he typically sells, $10,000 to $25,000 offers at the end of the event. And they usually make their profit on the event, not from the event tickets, but from that offer. So he's closing millions of dollars in sales on Friday and Saturday from this offer and from what he's building the foundation of all week, right? So with that being said, 2 of the interesting pre-frames that he did on day one is one I would call the map, which is basically, he told this story about how if you want to get somewhere, if you want to get to your dream outcome, which the whole event was basically around these, right? The 2 comical awards, right? You want to be up here on stage, taking a picture with Russell and Todd. You need a map to get there, right? And not only do you need a map, you need a guide to take you there. And he talked about, like, you don't want 2 maps. You don't want to listen to 2 people. You want to listen to one person. Who's the person that can get you there the safest and follow them, right? So he's starting to seed this in your mind, like, okay, I need a guide. How do I get a guide? I don't know. How do I get a mentor? And then on day 3, what is he going to do? He's going to offer you the map, right? Through his Prime Mover coaching program. Number 2 was fear and faith. And there was tons of these throughout the entire event. But he told this story, again, of how there's 2 ways to make decisions. There's decisions made out of fear and decisions made out of faith. Because what is he going to do on Friday? He's going to ask you, like, I know there's some fear in making this decision, but I want you to make it in faith of what is more likely to get you to your dream outcome. And he really is the master of pitching on stage. And it's a lot of fun watching him. And he actually, later in the week, he did a improv webinar where basically he called somebody up to the stage and he asked them all the questions about their story and their offer. And then he wrote a webinar live over the course of like 30 minutes. And they went back down and then he presented it to 5,000 people. And the reason I bring that up is this offer, it was a dog training offer to help kids with like asthma, allergies, autism, and a few other things. And so it's an offer that doesn't apply to me at all. But when he's up on stage pitching it, I'm like, man, I want this offer. Like this sounds amazing. And I think that's really twofold. One, his energy that he brings when he pitches is just like, it's contagious, I guess, to say the least. And number 2, the copy he wrote for this thing in a matter of 30 minutes was pretty good. It just reminded me, like, there's such value in the ability to be able to sell from stage. So the next speaker that I think was super interesting was Andy Elliott. Now, I've heard about Andy Elliott. I've seen like him on YouTube titles, but I had no idea what he did. But one thing I thought was really cool is I was impressed at how fast he's grown. So within just the last 5 years, he went from a car salesman to building a $100 million brand. Now, I don't know if that is total revenue or if that's like yearly revenue now. I didn't quite catch that when he said they built a $100 million brand, but regardless, he's grown super fast, which is just super cool to see. And he started out making YouTube videos 5 years ago about car sales. So he's gone broad, which was one of his points, right? Start niche and then go broad. He made 3 videos a day for over a year, so over 1,000 videos, without making an offer, without selling anything. He would literally take phone calls with people, his YouTube subscribers, give them free advice, sell nothing for an entire year. And then finally, after a year, he makes an offer. He builds a course on his whole process of how to sell cars, sells it to his YouTube audience, and goes to bed. He listens it, goes to bed, wakes up the next morning to $150,000 in sales. I've heard these types of stories all the time. It's like basically Gary V's, jab, 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 right hook, right? Like give, then ask. Last year we had a client who had a similar story that built up an audience, never sold to it. Then, finally like, okay, we're going to launch an offer to this audience. They launched an offer. The very first day of launching this thing, it does $500,000 in sales in the first day. Had they, done that from day one, they would have never had that, just explosive growth. You just build up so much goodwill in the audience that when you have an offer that, you think is good, you want them to buy, they're just going to buy it at such a higher rate if you built up all this goodwill. And his strategy for posting on YouTube was also really interesting. He said basically he would Google the keywords like car sales or how to sell cars or whatever. And then he would look at what Google said people also search for. So like the ... Like people also search for, how to sell used cars, how to, handle car sales objections or whatever, Google is saying people are also searching for. And then he would make videos on that exact title. And he made 3 videos a day for over a year without ever selling something. And if you Google, I think it was just like car sales or car sales training, he, is like multiple of the first options from literally just doing that for a year. So that strategy was really interesting on YouTube, not trying to go viral, just trying to capitalize on these small search terms to get traffic day after day. Okay, the next speaker that I thought was pretty interesting was McCall Jones. Now, I didn't know who this was. She had a pretty long presentation, but there was one key thing that I thought was pretty valuable. And it was this way to make an offer, okay? And offers annoy me a lot. The reason they annoy me is anyone that you listen to, typically they define offers in different ways. So for instance, I used to get frustrated and people would be like, oh, your ads aren't working? Well, what's your offer? And I'm like, well, what do you mean it's my offer? Like, I literally don't offer anything in my ads. It's an indirect ad. Like, I don't sell anything. I'm just trying to get them to do this free thing. And what I didn't understand then, that I do understand now, is an offer is really like, even if it's a free thing, like even if it's this YouTube video, I'm offering you something of what I learned at Funnel Hacking Live 2025. If you value that more than 20 minutes of your time and more than anything else you could watch right now, here you are watching it. But if you don't, then it's a bad offer. But in her presentation, she was specifically talking about like what you're selling at the end of a webinar, for instance. So literally like what you are offering to the audience. So a little bit different of a definition, which I think is an important note to make because I don't think this applies super well to, getting someone to click on a YouTube video or something like that. But her strategy to build offers is built around the book, When You Give a Mouse a Cookie. In this book, if you've ever read it, it goes like, if you give a mouse a cookie, it'll ask for a glass of milk. If you give them a glass of milk, it'll ask for, I don't know what's next, like a napkin or something, right? And her point here was offers deliver sequential results, right? So each thing you give somebody, it typically will create another problem, right? You make them a bunch of money. Now, they have a big tax bill, right? For instance, you get them a bunch of traffic, the traffic's not converting. You get them a bunch of leads, their sales team isn't converting, right? You have these sequential problems that you can solve. And when you position your offer as this in like a timeline, right? Like first we're gonna do this, second we're gonna do this, third we're gonna do this. It just like people value it so much more because they can see how it solves all of these sequential problems, which is similar to what Cole Gordon teaches when you pitch on the phone. He calls it the bridge, which is basically you're outlining like, what is the bridge to go from current situation to desired situation? First, we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do this, which is just a great way to pitch. So that was McCall Jones. Next was Myron Golden, who had some just really good, quick, punchy things that I think were very valuable. One was wealth is your ability to create value for people other than yourself, right? This reminds me a lot of what Hermosi says about wealth. He says wealth is your ability to create value multiplied by your ability to negotiate on that value. So if you can make someone $1 million, you negotiate 12% of it, you make 120 grand a year, right? Obviously not everything is that explicit, but like in some way it all kind of boils down to that, right? Then you went into 3 ways value is created, right? Like why does somebody value one thing and somebody else doesn't, right? And you went into 3 ways. There's one of these ways, which is the last one, is one everyone talks about, but there's 2 that most people don't talk about. So the first one is past perceived voids create present perceived value. He told a story here of a car he wanted when he was 18. It was like his, nothing crazy. It was like a Pontiac GT or something. But like he wanted it when he was 18 and he couldn't have it. Like he couldn't get it. Like either wasn't available, he couldn't afford it, whatever. So now that he's 60 and he can't afford it, he went out and he bought it. He's like, I don't care how much it costs, I'm buying, right? Because it was a past perceived void that made him want it. Okay, so that was number 1. Number 2 is present perceived virtue creates present perceived value. So this is something that you see as virtuous now. And in this instance, he gave an example of saving time that will make you pull at your wallet and pay if you can get that thing, right? So you value your time more than money. He gave an example of flying private. He's like, I will not fly commercial anymore. And he said he flew from Florida to Vegas and he's paid $110,000 to get there for Funnel Hacking Live, round trip to get there and back to Funnel Hacking Live. And he broke down why. He's like, I value my time at $40,000 an hour and it costs $11,000 an hour to fly private. And flying private saves me, he said, about 4 hours for a trip like this because I'm not waiting in TSA. I don't have to get there super early. I can just, pull up to the runway. So I'm basically paying 110 grand to save 160 is the way he looks at it, right? So that virtue creates that value in his mind, right? Thirdly, and this is one that most people talk about, is future perceived visions create present perceived value. This is like Hormozi's dream outcome part of the value equation. It's a future perceived vision. Something you see like a compelling future gets you to value that now and either invest time or capital into it. So those are the 3 ways to create value. And then he basically went over some of his offers, which was really interesting. He has everything from like books that make him, I think one of them makes like $500,000 a year from his most recent book, which is called Boss Moves or something like that. And then he has all the way up to $1 million a year offers that he sold 3 of last year. And I think one of his biggest money makers is what he calls a VIP day, where he sells these. It was $350,000 last year. Now it's $375,000. So you get to spend, half a day with him or a day with him, whatever, for like $375,000. And he sold 20 of these last year, which is just crazy. And the main takeaway here was like, it's kind of like a 4-minute mile, right? When you hear somebody is selling an offer for $1 million a year, you're like, man, I could probably raise the price of my offers by, $1,000 or what, like, now that doesn't seem like very much. It just kind of, again, it's that 4-minute mile. Someone, breaks it. And then now you're like, oh, I didn't even know that was possible. I didn't even know that room existed, right? So that was just a big takeaway. And then lastly from Myron was a couple points on lead gen. So he said the number one reason he thinks lead gen doesn't work is because you're positioning your lead gen as moving towards pleasure rather than moving away from pain. So an example of this is, you have a free ebook that's like 7 steps to 7 figures. And he said that typically doesn't work, especially on cold traffic, because people don't know you, they don't like you, they don't trust you, right? So that is a harder thing to get them to believe that they can get to 7 figures. Whereas if you position it as moving away from pain, which in this instance, he gave the example of, 7 things keeping entrepreneurs from making 7 figures. It's kind of the opposite claim. That's a lot more believable. So I don't think it's something that like 100% of the time one's better than the other, but it is something that's a good reminder to test both angles, right? Because one might work a lot better. Okay. The next thing that I learned was not necessarily from a speaker. It's from a party that Bad Marketing, which I think the founder, his name is Eddie Malouf or Eddie Malouf. I don't know how to say it, but that Eddie threw from Bad Marketing. It was after, I think it was like day 2. He rented this entire massive venue. I heard 1,300 people signed up for this thing. This event was probably, I don't know how much, but let's say a couple $100,000 at least, right? The interesting thing here for me was Eddie, as a marketer, as a business owner, has to be thinking about the ROI of this event. And the ROI probably isn't super measurable, but at this event, there was people like Ty Lopez, there's Ryan Pineda, Brad Lee, Jeremy Minor, Dan Henry, multiple people that I've done videos on. And the reason I bring that up is if Eddie would have just spent, say he took that same marketing budget, he's like, I can either throw this party, spend a few $100,000, or I could run Facebook ads. He's probably not going to get in front of people like Ty Lopez, people like Ryan Pineda, if he wants them as clients, right? And even if he does, they're probably pretty banner blind and they're probably not going to respond, right? Those high level relationships are built more on things like this. So he had, his logo literally like on all the walls. We'll play some clips. He had the, logos on all of the blackjack tables. He had his logo on a block of ice in a, what is it called? An old fashioned. He had an ice sculpture with his logo. Like literally the just brand share that he got from this thing is massive. Like he is seen now from that event as like the man, right? Like the guy at that entire event because of that party. And now here I am talking about it, right? So it just, I think, was like a really cool move that showed as a marketing agency, go figure, he knows how to market, right? It was cool. I just thought it was really well done. And just, I think will be a pretty good ROI from him. Now, next up is Mr. X, which is how they marketed this guy. I showed up late, so I didn't catch his real name, but he's essentially a media buyer that I think runs ads for some of the biggest people like Tony Robbins. And he shared a few like just key insights that if you run ads, I think you might find valuable. So number one was finding similar interests in people you're already targeting, right? And to give an example of for Tony Robbins, they realized, I guess, people like personal development, they like, this and that. But one thing a lot of them had in common was they liked romance novels, which is super random. I don't even know how they figured this out. But they started targeting on Meta people who liked romance novels, and that was it. And he said that audience absolutely slayed for Tony Robbins, which is just, it's like you're stepping out of the red ocean of everyone that's targeting personal development people for personal development, right? And you're moving into like this blue ocean of people who probably do like it, but they haven't seen that message, so they're not saturated, which I just thought was amazing. Okay, then there was just like these rapid fire points that I'll put up on the screen. Basically, he said like these things are different ways to get cheaper CPL. So like different aspect ratios, for different ads based on how long or how short they are. He also said minimally edited videos with just simple subtitles typically lead to a cheaper CPL. He said you can run either static ads or shorter videos to people who watched 95% of your ad but didn't sign up, and that'll get you pretty cheap leads. You can open your Facebook copy with the term breaking news, and that'll get you a cheaper CPL, so that's something to try. And then he also, this was something I haven't thought of, he said you can run reach or awareness campaigns for your live now ads. This is like you're running a webinar, you're running a challenge, and it's live now. You target that audience, and that will get you a higher show up rate. And then he said you can make a static ad with the text that says last chance or final notice and run it 48 hours before your event starts, which will get you cheap leads. And then he also said you can run close down static ads to people who went to the event but didn't purchase, that you can run with the text event only offer. Next, another bonus thing I thought was cool that wasn't necessarily a speaker, but I just thought was cool to watch, was Russell Brunson's inner circle pitch. So they do this cool thing where at the event, they obviously give away 2 Comma Club awards. And people that win 2 Comma Club awards get invited to a lunch where it's a free lunch. And during the lunch, Russell Brunson gets on stage and he pitches Inner Circle, which is either 50K, 150K, or 250K at that lunch. And just the way they pitched it was super cool. It was, kind of honestly pretty casual because they only had like 12 spots open and there's like 500 people in this room. So they probably filled it up. I know the 250K was already filled up and there was just a few spots in the 150 and the 50. But that was cool. It's just an interesting thing. Like they do that. They do the prime mover coaching on Friday for 10 grand, which they probably made, a few $1 million off of. They have the event tickets. They sold the VIP day they sold VIP tickets, and then they sold a day with Dan Kennedy. That was an upsell. So they just have multiple different revenue sources from this event. Okay, next, this is another bonus one from Todd Brown, who was not at the event. I wish he was at the event, but he wasn't. But this came from lunch. So I was sitting at lunch with a friend who actually works with Todd Brown a good amount because he's the CMO of a company that pays about $50,000 a quarter to get consulting from Todd Brown. And this thing he said was he heard this story from Todd Brown about a tagline for a company that was basically like the iPod before the iPod. And this company, they had this tagline that was put music in your pocket, right? Because back then that was revolutionary. And they were trying to beat that control. They're running variations for this tagline. Like nothing's working as good as the control. Like, man, we really want to beat this thing. And eventually they changed one letter in that tagline that resulted in a 300% increase, which is just crazy to even say. And that one letter was the letter S. And they put it after the word put. So it changed it from put music in your pocket to puts music in your pocket. And the theory as to why this works so much better is because it sounds done for you. So you can do an audit of your copy. And if it is done for you, obviously if it's not done for you, you don't want to make it sound like it is. But if it is done for you, I was looking at my copy, like how can I make my copy like better represent the fact that it is done for you, right? It's not do it yourself. And I just thought that was super cool. Like small little changes like that are all over sales funnels where, you can have a massive performance improvement if you just make small little tweaks and test things consistently. So that was just an extra little bonus thing that I got at lunch from a good friend of mine. Okay, last speaker that I thought was awesome was Tony Robbins. Not that I didn't think other people were awesome. I honestly didn't go to every single session. So the last one that I was at that I took something away from was Tony Robbins. And there's, he had obviously a lot of like personal development stuff, but the main things that I took away were business lessons. He had one, it was all honestly pretty fundamental, nothing groundbreaking, but all good stuff. So at one point he called somebody from the audience and he asked, why should I do business with you rather than anyone else? And the guy kind of like stutters over his words, right? He's in front of 5,000 people. And he gives an answer that's kind of like, right? Doesn't really land. And Tony's point from this was, if you don't know the answer to this question, that's the biggest constraint in your business. Figure out how to answer it and then practice answering it, right? So when you get asked, you can boom. And he said a good place to start is your answer to that question is basically how does what you have get them the result that they want, different or better than anyone else, right? So rather than just saying like, for instance, we optimize sales funnels, it would be like, we optimize sales funnels so that you can make more profit without more effort or ad spend, right? So you're already doing this work, you might as well get more out of it, right? It's just somewhat of an example of like adding a benefit onto what you do and why somebody should work with you rather than anyone else. But it's something that I think should be pretty iterative and like you should see, doesn't land. Like if you say it, are people like, oh my gosh, like I need that, I want that, right? Super basic, but just a really good lesson. He also just made this point in a couple places that you need to give people an experience of you doing more for them than anyone else. Now, the reason I bring this up, and the reason I like this is I think often it's tempting as a business owner to overcomplicate things. Like, what funnel should I have? And what, should I use a VSL or a webinar? And like, what should my offer be? And like all of these things, when at the core of it, if you solve a problem for somebody and you solve it better than anyone else, and you care about them more than anyone else, the business is going to grow, right? You can suck at marketing and it's still going to grow. And I think it's just a good reminder to do the boring work that works, as Hermosi would like to say. And lastly, he gave 3 steps that you got from Tony Hsieh on how to grow a business that I thought was good. He said, who is your ideal client? Sounds basic, but he actually added a little bit more depth to this. He said, you might realize like your ideal client is someone who would buy even during a recession. They'd leave great reviews. They wouldn't bother you on weekends, right? Whatever these things are that would make them an ideal client for you. Next was, what is your irresistible offer for them? Right. And I think this is twofold. It's your lead gen offer, right? If you have an offer that's like free, right? Rather than it's like, oh, book a sales call. Like, how can you make that more sexy that, they want it, right? There's some companies that do this really well, that make your lead gen offer just outstanding, right? And Hermosi actually says this is one of the easiest ways to 5x some businesses. You just tweak whatever that front end first offer is. And the second is the core offer, the thing you're actually selling to these people. How can you make that irresistible? And you gave a few examples of like Zappos and Domino's, right? Like if your pizza's not here in 30 minutes, it's free, right? As a couple examples of irresistible offers. And lastly, again, kind of like what he said earlier, over deliver. He said, satisfied customers go away, raving customers stay. Again, it's the simple stuff. It's caring about clients more than you care about yourself. It's about doing the boring work of mastering your craft or improving your product, right? Just the stuff that people don't want to necessarily do that has the biggest impact long term. So those are some of the things I learned from Funnel Hacking Live 2025 that I hope were valuable for you. And if you enjoy this video, YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this one as well. And I'll see you there.